Good evening, everybody. We'll get underway. I appreciate your patience with us getting started a little late because we wanted to make sure that we had quorums on all of our committees. So with that, intergovernmental, did you want to make a motion to open your public hearing? Okay. And we'll hold off on operations because you're the next set of articles after the first article. So can I have a motion from the Finance Committee to open their public hearing? Bruce? Bob? Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great. We're in session. First up is Article 18, and it's to amend the library project vote. It's on page 9 in your warrant. And I believe that we have Mr. Hartman here representing this article. Welcome, Mr. Hartman.
Thank you.
I think we also have the pleasure of having the library director with us this evening, Mrs. Batchelor. Welcome, Pat. Okay. Welcome, Mr. Hartman. You have the floor.
Yes. Probably the best way is to start this by going back. There was an article. This article was originally written and approved when it was originally proposed by town council. Apparently, it was amended that night of the town meeting. The amendment is such that we are not able to borrow the money. And the issue is that the intent of town meeting was to make sure that the town did not spend more than 50 cents on the dollar. But what they did is, instead of dealing with the cost and specifying 50%, they said the construction grant had to equal 50% of the appropriation. At best, the construction grant is $62,000 short of 50% of the appropriation. So we can't proceed. We actually have money in the bank. We've gotten the first payment on the grant. It's over $2 million. Yeah, we'll receive. Yeah, we have 147K in the bank. In May, we'll receive another $2 million. But we cannot. Well, technically, we can proceed because we have an appropriation. I'm not about to proceed until the matter's fixed.
Okay.
What we have is, if in fact the article said state funds or non-town funds, she actually has more than the $62,000 in state library aid that she has been saving for this project. But again, since the language that was voted tied it directly to the construction grant, we can't proceed. So this particular language was negotiated between our town council and bond council. And they've asked that we not change it.
Okay. Questions from either intergovernmental or the Finance Committee? And then we'll get to anybody from the public. Boy, this is highly unusual. Then I'll ask a quick question. Oh, Mrs. Hill.
The original article at town meeting, I recall that we did amend it on the floor to have 50% coming from the state, or at least 50%. I don't recall it being tied directly, specifically to construction.
Yeah, the article that passed and was certified by the town clerk indicates the construction grant itself had to be 50% of the appropriation.
But the total cost is still 14 mil-ish?
Correct.
And that's not all construction?
Temporary quarters for the library are in there.
Oh, okay.
Moving costs for the library are in there.
And the amendment was specifically geared towards construction, and it didn't encompass all of the rest? The temporary quarters, the...
I believe that was in the estimates all along.
I'm sorry, Pat, could you use just for the folks at home? Thank you.
When they amended the article, they specifically said matching funds to come only from the Mass Board of Library Commissioners construction grant. Initially, the article said, or other funds as available. But at the time that we applied for the, we hadn't received the grant when town meeting voted this money. So since then, the grant has been approved, and we have the exact amount, but when town meeting was voting it, we didn't know the exact amount. But the specific part of the language that was changed was that we would borrow money to match the library construction grant only. And we have other sources that we've been putting aside for this as well, and we want to include those sources to make the whole project 14 million. And it limits us from doing that the way the article was written or amended.
Can you give me an idea of how far off we are the way it is, or the way that was amended, the way it was passed?
$62,000.
That's it.
That's it.
The monies, anybody else have questions? Oh, go ahead, Barbara. Just a quick question, Pat, on the monies that you've put aside to help make up this deficit, those monies can be used for the construction and in the project, et cetera. That's like the individual grant money you get every year. You've kind of,
Right.
and you can accumulate that, and that's
Yeah,
okay? Good.
they actually recommend that once you start the planning process for a library construction grant, if you're not depending on your state aid annual grant, you put it aside because there might be ineligible costs that the grant won't cover. So we've been doing that for several years.
Good, okay. Mrs. Anzavino?
I was just wondering, since the original bill came in 2011 for this price, is it still going to be worth this, or is it going to cost us more?
Well, I can. So when we had the architectural firm work with the building committee to put this package together to apply for the grant, they actually had an outside price estimator look at the design, you know, square foot and inch and all that, and they estimated the costs in $2011, and then they added contingency costs for inflation for 5 years.
Thank you.
Ms. Welch, Selectman Welch.
Cynthia Walsh, 1096 Park Street. I'm on the Board of Selectmen. I'm also a representative of Precinct 2 in town meeting. You know how I feel about the library, and you know I'm on the committee that supports the expansion. But as I was going through the bills today, before I signed the warrants, I noticed that our elevator did not pass the state inspection, and it's going to cost some money to bring it up to that. And if you've ever even tried to use the elevator, so as well as all of the functions of the library, one of the most important things about town-owned buildings is they have to be accessible to everybody. Population of Stoughton's getting older, and people with handicaps aren't confined to their homes anymore. We're much more mobile than we used to be. So I can't impress upon anyone how important it is that this project gets started as soon as possible, so that our library will be open to everyone.
Yes, Mrs. Ayers.
Hi, Donna Ayers. I'm intergovernmental, and I'm also a precinct rep from 3. I have a question that has to do with how this relates to the budget of the library, because in the past, when I was on the Finance Committee, we came up against that some of these funds can't be considered in the formula in terms of the money that we give to the library. There's a formula that they use in order to get state monies in order to run the library. It's part of the budget. And in the past, we were not allowed to put the construction costs as evidence that we were fully supporting our library at the time. Is this going to count against us in that?
No, it won't.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't think capital spending applied, correct?
That we were spending enough money on the resources at the library. It was 2008 when we were cutting people, and even though we were contemplating, we were spending a lot on fixing the library, there was a lot of money being thrown at things like the parking lot and everything else, and they said, we're sorry, you're not demonstrating that you're doing enough for the library. You need to spend more on that budget, or we will cut back the funding that we give in the grant monies and things like that. Yeah, so if we spend 14 million on a new library, are they going to tell us that we didn't demonstrate? Thank you.
So the way this, that's a good question, and I understand what you're thinking. Back in '08, we actually had to apply for a waiver to continue to be certified with the Mass Board of Library Commissioners to qualify for these additional funds, like the construction grant and other grants that we apply for, including the state aid grant. They have very strict requirements that every year, if the town cuts any departments disproportionate to the library, or if our book budget isn't at least 13% of the overall budget, or if we don't have a director with a master's degree. There's like 5 requirements you have to have, or if we're not open 64 hours a week based on our population. I think you came to one of those trainings. And so I have to, when I fill the grant out every year, I have to prove that we meet all those requirements to get the state aid grant every year. That allows us to get additional money from the state. It also allows us to be in a certified status so that we can get a $7,500 STEAM grant for extra programs for kids, and it qualified us to get this $7 million grant from the state, which is other taxpayers in the state have paid for this so that we can build this library. Donna's question about the parking lot, the state grant, construction grant doesn't, an eligible cost is disallowed if it's any money is spent on asphalt or parking lot construction. They consider that a municipal obligation, not a state aid obligation. So we're on our own for the parking lot. So when we had CBT come in and help us design the renovation and expansion, we specifically said to them, we can't lose one parking space. We just paid a lot of money for this additional parking. We've doubled our parking, but it's still only 52 spots, and street parking. But when you consider we're open 12 hours a day, those spaces are used constantly all day long. Some people come for 10 minutes, some come for 2 hours, so it's not just a static 52 spots. They're used many times during the day. But in any case, we can't use state aid money to build parking lots, and that's why they said no to that. As long as we stay within our budget and build something very close to what town meeting authorized, like we said to them, you can't give us a design that's 3 floors because I'm not asking town meeting for more staff to staff 3 floors. So the new design can't lose any parking spaces, and it can't be an additional floor. And they came up with a design that met all of our needs, was energy efficient, resolved all the things that we have to replace now, like HVAC, new roof, remove asbestos, all that. So we fulfilled the requirements through their granting process, and as long as the final design, which would be the next stage once we get this technicality cleared up, has to be very similar to what the proposed preliminary design was the town meeting voted. We can't go and come up with a final design that's dramatically different. Foxborough did that, and it caused a big ruckus. So they won't okay that. They'll stop the money coming if we did something like that. But as far as if we build the project, we fulfilled their expectation of the grant, and we would still have to continue to meet to get the state aid grant every year and to stay certified. We would still have to meet those 5 minimum requirements that I was listing before. But we have been able to do that pretty reasonable lately.
Very good. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Murphy.
On the, was it 6 million, 6.7 million, whatever the money that we have previously put aside for this, has that been planned for in the budget, so we basically write that off the books as already spent money? I mean, I realize we haven't spent it, but we've allocated that towards the library. So on future expenses, would that be affected because it hasn't come out of the piggy bank, so to speak?
Well, it comes in form of, is it a state grants, Pat, on an annual basis?
It's a 20% disbursement a year for 5 years.
Right.
So we've already received most of, well, by the end of May, we'll get our first disbursement. So we can borrow the full amount of the matching funds. You all voted to borrow 7 million to match this. We're not borrowing anything until this technicality gets cleared up, but we can borrow that over time. The treasurer, well, Mike, you can probably explain this better, but
Peter, just a point of qualification. Peter, you talking about like the 60,000 that we still got to come
No,
up
no,
with?
no, what I'm looking at is the first money that we allocated.
Yeah, wait a minute, that
Was
we
that 7
allocated.
million?
it was 7 million.
Yeah, you
Okay.
you authorized the borrowing of 7 million.
I understand, we
and-
authorized to borrow it, but we haven't actually borrowed it as of yet.
No, that's how we found out we had the problem. When we discussed the matter with bond counsel said, well, you have an appropriation and you can begin, you cannot borrow any money.
Right, and the money that we've received already, Bill, is encumbered. It can't be spent on anything but the
Right.
library. Right.
Okay,
It's been allocated for this project, it's in the bank,
Yep.
you know, drawing fantastic amounts of interest like everybody else's money.
so the 7 million that we plan on borrowing, how will that affect the budget going forward? Because if we're gonna start borrowing that money to start the project, correct?
I think we'll borrow it as needed. I don't even know if we'll end up needing to borrow it because we have available cash to use for that.
Yeah. Because
Oh.
of the way the money comes in, we're not going to borrow the money up front like if we were building a school. So come this May, we'll have $2 million in the bank.
To start.
That will get us started. So you're looking at, you know, if you're going to borrow, you're going to borrow somewhere down the pike. Another option we always have, that with the FinCom and town meeting's approval, the town could decide to take money out of the building stabilization fund to cut the amount you borrow. So if you pulled $1 million out of the building stabilization fund, and I think we have, what, 1.2, 1.3 in there now, then you would only borrow 6 million.
Okay, and I think my concern is, I'm not against, we all voted for the library, but we're looking at borrowing $7 million. We also have a high school that we're looking in the future, so that's another big chunk of dollars that we're gonna be looking for. So have we planned the budget, you know, the long-range plan, for borrowing $20 million? Include 7 of that being for the library?
No, because we don't know how much the school's going to cost us. We know it's going to cost us 90 or 100 million dollars. Certainly the state will chip in for 50 or 55% of that, whatever that might be. And certainly the powers to be understand that that's coming down the pike. Part of our hope is that maybe we can put enough money away in stabilization over the next few years to potentially write a check for the library and just be done with it and not have to borrow. That would be a terrific thing to happen, except for in winters when you get $1.25 million worth of snow bills. But anyways, but that's kind of some of the thinking behind it. I don't think we'll borrow the 7 million total. I think that we're going to be able to pay out of the building stabilization reserve, which is part of what that was designed to do. And if there is an amount that's still needed, there are funds in town that can be borrowed short-term and repaid in a fairly short order without a lot of long-term debt.
The other question I have is somewhat it was mentioned that the elevator is now, the state didn't approve it.
They didn't approve it quite some time ago. It's not handicapped accessible.
Is it still functional?
I think they use it to move books between floors and that
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
thing.
it did fail an inspection recently, but it has been since inspected and it passed, just, I think, in the last week or two. But it's a non-handicap accessible elevator in that you can't turn your wheelchair around in it. If you haven't been to it, it's got a heavy
Oh,
door
I've seen it, and
and an accordion door. So we help, the reason we haven't been sued by a handicapped person in town, which they would have every right to do, is because there's handicap parking in the new parking lot on the first floor and in the rear parking lot. So if they go to either of those floors, they have immediate access without the elevator.
Right.
If somebody wants to get a book downstairs and go to a program upstairs, they can either drive around or they have to use the elevator, and we generally help people because it's not accessible.
And again, my concern would be for the repairs, if that was not usable, or you say it's not, a person cannot go in that elevator.
They can't, we all use it. It's just
Use it
that
today
if
for
you're,
handicap.
if you're in a wheelchair, you either have
Okay.
to back in or back out, and that's
Right.
not ADA approved.
Right, that's
So somebody could sue us because it's a public building.
really frowned upon.
Yeah.
You answered my question, thank you.
Pat, didn't we approve an elevator there, though, for 300,000 a long time ago?
So, yeah, when I came in 97, in July, you all had just finished a townwide ADA renovation
Initiative.
plan. And all the schools got elevators slapped on the outside of the building if they needed it. And there was a lot of expanding of bathrooms and rails and ramps and all that. And when they went to finish the library, they only had 40,000 left to do the elevator. So they put it out to bid before I got here, and of course, nobody wanted to touch it. And the dilemma with, so when I came, the trustee said, please see what you can do about this. We couldn't do anything for 40,000. So over the next 3 years, I came in front of town meeting with different amounts. First it was 300, then it was 400. I think it was finally 450 by the third year. And the complication with that building is the back of the building was built into ledge. So they dynamited it and built a very energy efficient building because it's in ledge, so it's well insulated. The front of the building has no second floor, so you can't just slap a 2-floor elevator on the outside of the building, because if you do it where there's no ledge, there's no second floor. So we had engineers come in, we went through a lot of different possibilities. They talked about putting a glass chute next to the stairway. They talked about a stair chair, but none of that flew. So that's where we are.
Well, I thought we did make an appropriation, though. We voted one at town meeting, but
No,
I guess not.
you
huh?
never did. We did spend, we got a large grant that also was being wrapped up when I first got here to remove an underground oil tank, and we converted to gas. But yeah, the elevator thing never happened.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
tried.
Dr. Camacho?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to know about the gold and platinum level. So if we vote tonight, we have to vote one or the other. It says 7,006,770, or if platinum, 7,040,283. So which is it? I feel like I'm advertising for American Express here. Is it the gold level or the platinum level?
So the dilemma with that is we don't know yet. The way the grant works is they guaranteed us the initial award of $6.7 million, and then they said to us, every library, we are encouraging, all municipal buildings in the state now, they're encouraging to make them some level of LEED certified. So we're guaranteed an incentive, a LEED incentive grant based on what our final building comes out as. So in the preliminary building, we, without doing anything extra, just using energy efficient windows and design and, no solar panels or anything else, it would have come to, which is the cheaper one, the gold one?
Gold.
We are between, we can potentially produce a LEED certified building either at the gold or the platinum level based on the preliminary design. They're not going to give us that award until the building's complete. So we can count on another 200 and something $1,000, but we won't know until the building's complete. Does that make sense?
No.
So,
The point is, we have to vote an amount.
Y-
So this is
You-
what
you don't
the
have to vote
quandary
an
is for
amount.
me.
no, you don't have to vote an amount, you just have to vote the article, assuming that those funds are available.
Yeah, the amount you're looking at is part of the background. As it says, by way of background, noting that under the vote, below that is not part of what you're voting.
So we don't really know then, it's a little bit squishy, what the actual total is here. It's either the gold total or the platinum, but then we're not really sure it's either one of those when we vote to change the language. So it could be $1 million more. Is that what you're telling me?
No, it could be $35,000 more. The difference between gold and platinum is $201,081.
I understand that, but with change orders and everything else that comes along with a building project, you could go $1 million more.
They don't have appropriation to do that,
No, we cannot exceed the appropriation.
right?
So what do you do about change orders?
We won't have any,
Yep.
Okay,
you know.
they
You
got
set
14
aside a
million bucks.
you set aside a contingency. My experience in my long career has been, I've never worked on a project that had change orders that totaled more than 2%.
okay.
And I've
$14
fired
million.
more than my share of architects.
So the 14 million includes 5 years of 5% cost appreciation, for lack of a better term, over that life cycle. So you probably started at somewhere around, I don't know, 13,
Actually around 10, I think.
10, and now it's added 5% a year over 5 years, and that's how you got to the 14 million-ish.
Maybe. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we did send it back 2 years ago to the cost estimator and said, okay, it looks like this might happen in '05. Are we still within the range? And because of the recession, at the time, he gave us a new number, and it was still around 14 million.
Good.
The original, if you look at the grant application, the original cost before contingencies and insurance and having outside people to come in and test the HVAC system and all that stuff was around 10 million. So they built it in.
Okay. Other questions? Pat?
I remember this vote very clearly. I had to help write it by hand because it was kind of a mess on the floor. And the spirit was clearly that we receive 50% in the town, not pay more than 50%. And I can see by the numbers that we're satisfying the spirit of that vote. My only question is when I read the new wording, it doesn't say anything, and I guess I can understand why, but it doesn't say anything at all about the 50% unless I'm missing that. So it's just saying, provided that the amount of such authorized borrowing shall be reduced by the amount of any grant received. So was the intent to just take out that language entirely and not show that the spirit was, you know, a 50-50? Because it almost sounds like if we didn't receive a grant, okay, we'll still borrow the 14 million. I'm just stuck on the last two lines of the wording.
Yeah, I'll let you deal with that one. I mean, that is the purpose of the language down below, to show that we
Right.
have more than
Yeah.
50% in other funds.
But that won't be in the motion,
And
correct?
we
Right.
do intend to keep
that's
with
the
the spirit
50%.
of what town meeting voted.
Right, so maybe I'm just getting the cart before the horse, but the motion, if the motion is just this paragraph, the motion won't say anything at all about
No,
50%.
when council prepares the motion, the motion will show 50%.
It will.
Wait a minute, isn't this the motion?
No, this is not the motion, this is the article.
It looks pretty much like a motion.
I don't think it is yet.
It contains all the elements.
I don't know if town,
I think it contains the elements, but
Because the way I interpret is, we're on the hook for $14 million, but we can't do anything unless we get these appropriations below from the MPLCP, the preliminary design, the state aid, and the Helen Lake Estate donation. That's part of this motion.
correct.
Without those items, my understanding is we can't move forward.
so let me clarify. When we submitted the first article to town meeting that bond council and town council had approved before it went in, we hadn't received the grant yet. So the reason it was changed on town meeting floor was because we didn't know how much of the grant we would get and how much of that would be eligible costs, right? So people were uncomfortable with the way it was written. But it was written more loosely to, initially we wrote it to say, the town will pay up to 50% of, at least, you know, up to 50% of a grant totaling $14 million, based on the receipt of the state aid grant and other monies that were available. When it got rewritten, we took out the up to, and we took out the other monies available. So when bond council saw the revised or the amended article, it only said we could borrow money that matched this construction grant and no other funds. And normally, when we submit articles, we say a specific grant and other available funds. And by taking out the other available funds, it limited us to borrowing this. So we have listed the other available funds so people will see that we have the 7 million that we can match with the grant. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I just want to make sure that the taxpayers are protected, because it just looked like if this was the motion, we would borrow 14 as long as we received grants without specifying what the grants are. And it was nobody's intent that we'd be on the hook for $14 million.
Oh, no. And that's not ours either, but for some reason, bond counsel has said we have to word it this way.
So let me tack it another way. So the 6.7 million is a guarantee. We're going to have 2 million shortly. There's nothing that would stop the rest of that money coming to us, is there?
We do have to act in a certain period of time, or we go back down. Provided this article passes town meeting, nothing would stop. That's correct. But essentially, when we got the grant, we were supposed to start, and we have explained the problem to the state library people, and they've been very patient in waiting to see what happens at town meeting.
I guess my only concern, and I'll leave it at this, is I don't want to see us back on town meeting floor in the same leaky boat we were in the first time, when someone says, this doesn't say 50%, how are we going to rewrite this on the floor, and end up back in the same boat? That's my only hesitation, but I guess, we'll get the motion and we'll see what it says and take it from there.
Okay, Roberta, and then Donna.
The previous speaker makes a good point on that, but what the town manager has stated is, this is an article. It is not the motion to be moved on the floor. So when you write the motion is going to have in it something that refers to the 50%. Is that true or false?
The motion itself may actually have the various funding sources, which add up to more than 50%. It may not say 50%, but it will show the other sources of funds. That's why it's written out here.
Not to exceed 50%?
Our bond counsel does not like not to exceed.
Well, how about the town shall only provide 50% of the project amount as the last sentence?
How about if they say that it's not to exceed $14 million and it's contingent upon these other sources of revenue?
That's fine. We can
Yeah, I
talk to
like
them
that.
about that. I mean, clearly, we do understand that the intent of the Finance Committee and of town meeting is that we will not spend more than 50% of the dollar of local money. And that's why we've demonstrated here that we have, with the grant and other sources, more than 50% of the projected cost.
All set, Roberta?
That indicates 50% will be in the motion. Is that yes or no?
I'm hearing no.
So I can't vote for this,
Okay.
because that is not what the town meeting asked for. I can't override the vote of town meeting.
So, Michael, just to be clear, the bond council is not going to, and the town council are not going to approve language that says 50%. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I don't know.
Okay.
I can say I'm more than willing to run it past bond council.
Okay.
This is what the two councils came up with together.
Okay, so if they could get their motion to us prior to us voting, and what we'll do is continue this article tonight after we entertain all the rest of the questions. How's that? Make sense? Good. Jim Guerin.
My recollection of town meeting was that the same discussion that we're having this evening was being held at that time. Yes. I think the town wanted to be assured that there was never going to be any more town involvement than $7 million. And it kept chasing around about that 50%, and it was getting knocked down, and it kept coming up. I think that at town meeting, if we go to town meeting again, it'll be the same argument. and people want to be assured that we're not going to spend any more than $7 million, no matter what this thing costs.
That was the intent, and that is why we had the rewriting on town meeting floor. The dilemma was, in 2011, we hadn't received the grant. So we were kind of functioning without knowing how much they were going to give us. It was a ballpark. When you build something and you apply for a grant, it's all a ballpark. And even though we were requesting a $14 million project, the state could have, most of the libraries around us, the state only gave them 3 to 5 million. We got almost 7. So
Right, but even at that, the feeling was that we were not going to involve any more than $7 million in this thing here, no matter what it costs. And if the state squeezed down, then we were going to get less of a library.
that was exactly how people felt. You're right. I just don't know how to rewrite this to satisfy bond counsel and still make it easily clear to town meeting. That's the dilemma we're in. He and I have gone back for hours about this, because bond counsel says you can't say up to, you can't say not to exceed. Maybe we should just put an article in that says the town will borrow $7 million for the library. End of story. I don't know.
Mrs. Ayers?
Is it possible just to put in the language that says that the town said that during that? Because I agree with what everybody else has said, and I think that that was definitely very clear, up to 7 million, no more. Thank you.
Mrs. Hill?
In other articles or motions, maybe that's the key, that when we see it in the motion, yes, it's a $14 million project. The town votes to appropriate $14 million. And in other motions, we have specified, FinCom does it all the time, 7 million from the town will borrow 7 million, whatever, and then all these other instances of exact appropriation so that it comes to the 14 million. So can that be the motion? That way we, quote unquote, are only on the hook to borrow 7 million as a town for the total project. There wouldn't be 50% stated, it would be 7 million.
We'd have to explore that, and the reason I say that is because I think technically the state aid, it's the call of the trustees how it's spent, and that's probably true of the Helen Lake Estate donation.
But these...
But yeah, they're willing, she says.
Correct.
So.
You're telling us that these funds are going to be there. Therefore, the town, I would think, would be willing to state, for a $14 million project, explain where the money's coming from, like we do in every other motion.
I know, but what you've said to me, well, at least what I'm interpreting it is, will it fly with bond counsel? And I don't know. That's why I'm saying we'd have to ask bond counsel.
Michael, you think they could give us a decision by tomorrow?
We can try.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Yes, we'll need a motion to table this until no later than Wednesday, April 1st. No. So, Don, is that your motion? Is there a second? Pat, second. For both committees voting, all in favor? Intergovernmental, everybody's in favor? Pat, Donna? It looks like it's any not in favor? Abstaining? Ed, you're abstaining? So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 13, 14 and 1? 13 and 1. 13 for, 0 against, 1 abstaining.
We just voted.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, because we're just, because that night we're just voting. But we'll continue the public hearing on this article until no later than April 1st. so that when we reconvene, we'll reconvene in a public hearing for this article. And then the Finance Committee will convene a Finance Committee meeting only. Okay, thank you, Intergovernmental. Thank you, Mrs. Basler. Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. We are moving on to Article 17, completion of Woodpecker Road, and that is on page 8 in your warrant.
You should convene your committee.
We have to open up our portion.
Oh,
of the
that's right,
meeting.
I'm sorry, Peter, please, go ahead.
Make a motion that the municipal operations open up their meeting. All in favor? Aye.
Great. And just a note for the record that municipal operations, in addition, intergovernmental, both had quorums, in addition to the Finance Committee. Okay? Okay. Mr. Town Manager, completion of Woodpecker Road.
I know it's not on your agenda, but I have to start by pointing out that there's a companion article to this, and it's Article 16. If Article 16 does not pass, we cannot proceed with Article 17.
Where is that in our, we did that?
Have you done that already?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, we have never adopted the statute section that allows us to seize a bond to complete an unfinished project. So we have monies on deposits for unfinished projects. If 16 passes, then we can seize the bond for completion of the project that's referenced in Article 17, which is a project where the actual grading was done for a sidewalk, all of the drainage structures were put in, they've all since filled with silt, but the road was never properly paved. There is a little over $74,000 sitting in the bank. It's been sitting in the bank for more than a decade.
John?
We have an opinion from council, and we have verified it, that under state law, we can seize the bond and complete the road without accepting any liability for the street. So this would not necessarily become a town-accepted road. It would not count in our Chapter 90 formula, but it would, in fact, finish this road, which is one of the primary entryway to, my understanding, is a subdivision with more than 70 homes.
Okay, which would also position it in the future to become possibly an accepted road in the town.
It could, yes.
Yeah. How much is left to, what's left to complete?
The catch basins need to be reopened, and the roadway needs to be done with a proper berm installed. The road has to be properly laid out according to Mark Tisdale. We have sufficient funds to do that.
Okay.
We do not have sufficient funds to put in the sidewalks that were part of the original plan, but we do have funds to make the roadway safe.
Okay. Questions from, I'm sorry, Bruce, and then Steve, then Jim?
Woodpecker Road, is this the one that comes, is this the end that comes into Elm Street, or is that West Street there? West, yeah, you foreigners don't know.
I'm sorry, Bruce. I can't answer that question. I can tell you that it was part of a project done by the Martinelli family. And someone before that. And in essence, what happened is one developer paved one half of the road and one developer paved the other half of the road. And the two halves aren't even paved the same way.
Okay.
Mr. Mitchell?
Unfortunately, I've been involved with this for years, and there was a ruling from town council years ago that Woodpecker Road was not part of that development, and we could not use the money on that bond, so.
I have to say, for the record, we have that ruling, and that is not what the ruling says. The ruling says we cannot use the money until we adopt this statute section, and that when we adopt this statute section, we can, in fact, seize the funds and complete the road. And that is the opinion we have today, as a follow-up to the opinion that was given more than 10 years ago. I can't explain why the town didn't act on the opinion that was given 10 years ago, but in researching this, when residents came to us and asked, you know, when are you ever going to complete our street, We pulled that opinion, and that opinion does in fact say that if you do Article 16, you can do Article 17.
No, I hope you're right.
All set, Steve? Mr. Guerin?
I've learned that Woodpecker Road is a two-phase project, and the two phases were done by different developers. And the bond that's left over is from the developer of Phase 1. I'm not sure about the legality of taking the bond from Phase 1 to make changes or to make corrections to the
Again,
things
we
that are
have a
missing.
ruling from council that it is in fact legal, provided we adopt the statute section that allows us to seize the bond. It doesn't matter if it says Phase 1 or Phase 2, as far as council's concerned, it's the same project. The firm that put the money up more than a decade ago no longer exists. The money's just sitting in the bank.
There's nearly 1,000 feet of roadway down there, totally undeveloped. It was graded off at one time and left, partially they'd had unfinished paving on the bottom of it, which was deteriorating. They went down after a while because there were trail bikes going up there, and they put these great large boulders down at the end of it to stop people from putting cars up there and going in and doing all manner of things down there. This needs more work than I see you're going to get out of $74,000. So are we going to limit the fixing of this thing here to $74,000, which I think is still going to leave it unfixed?
I can tell you that as street commissioners, the selectmen do not intend to spend 1 cent more than is currently being held.
I understand, but you could spend this money and still not have a fixed road.
According to estimates by town engineer, it would in fact fix the road.
Thank you.
Mr. Turnfio? Oh, and then Peter, sorry.
Loud. Developer number 2, who did the later part of the road, did he have a bond?
No, the only bond being held is from number 1.
So how did number 2 start without a bond to do his piece of the road?
You'd have to ask
We
the
don't
planning
know.
board that, Ed. The planning board sets a bond.
Mr. Murphy?
DPW doing the work?
No, we'll probably contract it out.
Okay. What would be the cost of, let me ask this question here. Where that road is, before it's unpaved, either side, do both sides have sidewalks leading up to this area?
I believe one side was paved for sidewalks, not the other side, not paved, it was actually graded.
And my question would be is, what would it cost, and you probably don't know off the top of your head, what would it cost to have sidewalks included in this? Because if they're going to be paving, they have all the equipment down there.
Actually, I had that conversation with Mr. Tisdale. He said that would push the price up towards $90,000. And again, the selectmen have basically endorsed this article, I think with the caveat that they don't intend to spend any more money than is currently being held in escrow.
I think for 90,000, you're talking 74, so you're talking 16,000 to have sidewalks included one way or the other. Because when we start doing roads from now on, we should be including sidewalks. And to go and stop short, to me, would be, it wouldn't be the proper thing to do. I think that, we should ask DPW their opinion as far as what they could do the work. And whether or not,
Well, our DPW does not really do paving, so we would use the town's contractor to pave, for example.
but they can do some grading and other things.
They could. According to the engineer, it's overgrown, the sidewalk area, and probably would have to be clear cut and regraded.
Well, in addition, we'd have to come up with funds for that. And there's also a sidewalk commission out already available that made priorities in town for sidewalks. So I think we'd have to put that in the mix.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I do agree. I think we should be building sidewalks.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense. Seeing no other, is that a hand up, Dr. Camacho? Please be vigorous about your wanting to be recognized.
There used to be a list, historical memory here, kept by the planning board. It was rather extensive, of bonds being held. I don't know if they were released back to the developers, if they were just sitting in a bank account someplace, and the state finally took the monies, or if the town was not notified, but there was a quite extensive list going back into the 80s of bonds that were held.
I believe it still exists, and again, if Article 16 passes, this would allow us to take a look at other projects. Unfortunately, in some of them, the bond that is left is not sufficient to finish the project. And I do recall it, the bond for Phase 2 was released by the planning board at some point. You know, and those records are still there. They're public records down in the planning office.
My point is that we will do whatever we can for those subdivisions that was not done under the auspices of the planning board, and the monies were simply left in whatever accounts they were left in at that point in time.
Ideally, that's what we would do, Doctor,
So this lets us do all of that.
you know, yeah, adopting 16 allows us to do that in any bond we're currently holding that where there's been a default by the developer.
But each one of those bonds has to be applied to each property or project that it was originally
That is
designated
correct.
for. Okay. All right, great. Seeing no other hands, taking the opportunity, moving on. Article 38, General Capital Outlay, page 16. So this one is, we've already done some work on this article. This is going to be actually Article 38A1. And 38A1 is our vehicles, 3 vehicles for the town. Mr. Town Manager.
The original request was for more vehicles. The request was modified.
Thank you, Peter.
The Board of Selectmen cut it to 3. This would allow us...
6?
Pardon?
Was it 6?
It was 6.
Okay.
In accordance with the vehicle policy that the board adopted, and the board's commitment to becoming officially designated as a green community, we have a policy now that requires fuel-efficient vehicles, and this would allow us to replace a car in the health department, a car in the building department, and a car in the engineering department. The cars in those departments are currently now old Crown Victorias. Some of them are not highway worthy. Some of them have certain species of mold growing in the back seat.
Then they were there since they were police cars then.
Yes.
I think you questioned the veracity of my vehicle's highway qualifications. Peter, then Ed, then Barbara.
When you're saying the health department, are you referring to the visiting nurses?
No. No, they do have an auto which we would not be replacing at this time.
That's the Board of Health.
Yeah, and this is the Board of Health.
Okay.
And that's so that they can do inspections?
Correct.
Is this, I'm not sure, we've been getting a list of the various vehicles within the town, and I'm not sure if these vehicles showed up on any of those lists.
They're on every list I've seen.
Okay, I'll have to look a little closer. Right, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Tunfield?
I just have a point of information. The Penny Saver article that was published said this article was 5.5 million or something, and this
Total,
will,
the total article?
yeah, this one's 2 point something. Did they include the windows in that thing, or is that just a typo, or I just kind of curious?
On the agenda, it shows $5 million also.
Yeah, water and sewer,
Oh.
this is just the general fund.
It's just the way it was worded, okay.
Barbara?
I was wondering what the truck was for?
The truck is to,
Sorry, that's the next article. If there's a motion,
sorry.
we want to hear those together. Can I have a motion to hear those together? Well, thank you, Ed. And then Joe, second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so now we can talk about the truck.
yeah, the truck will be shared by the town's new facility manager and the environmental officer.
And my second question is, this is not going to increase the fleet. Everything that you've got is a vehicle already among the fleet.
That is
you're gonna
correct.
get rid of.
The environmental officer currently uses the worst Crown Victoria we have, because he's tromping around in vernal pools, et cetera, so he mucks up a car pretty quick. And that's why we're putting him in a pickup truck. And that pickup truck will be available to the facilities manager, who from time to time, you know, for example, may have to go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy building equipment.
Okay, and I had one more, but I forgot. Okay, I'm good.
And the Crown Vic currently used by the environmental officer will be disposed of.
Okay, my last question is, so once we replace these vehicles are going bye-bye?
Oh, yes. The vehicle policy adopted by the Board of Selectmen now requires trading them in. That way there, we don't have an armory that looks like a used car lot.
Roberta, then Mr. Malley, then Ms. Walsh.
Mr. Chairman, this was an article that we took up with our subcommittee, General Government, and actually what we did was we voted the 81,249, and we also voted the 25,095 for a total of 106,344. We voted them. We
voted the total money.
We voted total so that there was some discretion as to whether they might have to change from cars to truck or whatever. it
Oh,
happened
okay.
to.
So, and hopefully they're going to get 3 cars and a truck out of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
What they asked for.
Mr. Malley.
You mentioned tonight, and I think it was mentioned at our last hearing, there's a vehicle replacement policy you've put in place. And it just would be helpful, I think, if all the committees had that. Because this is like something that I guess you developed, obviously, how vehicles are going to be replaced and what your
Actually, I
procedure is.
believe we sent a copy to your chairman when the Board of Selectmen adopted it last year. We'll be glad to forward another
Okay,
copy.
yeah. I don't remember seeing anything about it, so that's why I remember it was mentioned the other night. I was like, oh, I didn't know we had a vehicle replacement policy. So that's why it would just be
The
good to-
board adopted it in January of 14. And then since then, they've adopted another standard that the Energy Committee has asked them to adopt, which amended the original vehicle policy to require a certain mileage amount. So for example, I believe these cars have to get at least 29 miles to the gallon.
Okay. And Ms. Walsh.
That was the answer to my question. Thank you.
And I have a quick question, and somebody asked me this question, it seems to make sense. Do we have some kind of corporate identity that we're using uniformly across the town in terms of how our cars are painted and insigniated, and or are they just helter-skelter? How does that work? Will these new vehicles match vehicles at the fire department that are civilian vehicles, not apparatus, et cetera, versus, and obviously not police cars, but...
I think technically under state law, and unless the vehicle has been negotiated for private use, Town vehicles must have, number one, a municipal plate, and number two, the town seal on the vehicles. And I believe, regardless of whether that's our policy, I believe that is the state law, that they have to be identifiable.
So any non-official, for example, police, fire, cars that are passenger-type vehicles, they don't have to be, for example, blue?
No, we don't have a uniform color policy.
Okay.
We could put them all
Is there any
pink.
reason for that, or?
Yeah, frankly, it's never come up. Yeah, in fact, I do know
Stoughton
that,
itself should have an identity. So most corporations do, and this would just go towards furthering the marketability of our town.
I guess we could do a contest, and,
Well, I guess I just ask that you, you consider that in your procurement policy.
okay. I was thinking lime green.
Well, doesn't the fire department have some?
I
mean, it looks-
think with the exception of the chief's car, everything they have is red.
Okay,
I think.
all right. And so we'll also email this policy out to everybody, but now you have it in front of you. Thank you so much, Jamie. Okay, moving on. Any other questions? I think I got everybody. Moving on to Article 38E1, Town Hall Security System, $35,000 through $531. Mr. Town Manager.
This is a variety of things. For one thing, it's a card system and external doors rather than locks.
So an ID card swipe to
Correct.
get in and out.
Much
Okay.
like you see at the schools. Cameras in certain locations. We have already installed cameras in one particular department. If you've been in to pay your taxes, you may or may not have noticed there is a camera in the office of the collector. Essentially, the insurance company that we have has recommended that we put in some security measures in place. We don't currently have a panic button system, so this would probably be a panic button system. We do have and each department has one phone line with 911 on speed dial, but it doesn't operate quite the same way a panic system. So our security would not be as heavy as either the police station or the school system, but it would be more heavier than it is now.
Questions?
And incidentally, we have applied for a grant from our insurance company for $5,000 of this cost.
Okay. Dr. Camacho.
As part of the general government, and we voted for this for our subcommittee.
Very good. And I think it's long overdue, outside of the fact that you'll now know who's in this building when and who comes
Correct.
and goes, et cetera, and that the building's secure so that when people are in here working, particularly after hours, that they don't have to worry about somebody that shouldn't be here not being here. So,
That is correct.
yeah, okay, good stuff.
And we have found people in the building after hours, frankly.
I know that, right.
Let me rephrase that. People who shouldn't be in the building have been found in the building after hours.
Right. So, and they'll be caught on video, and they'll also be, they won't be able to gain access to
Correct.
begin with. So,
We also have departments that handle a great deal of cash, and the video cameras will be helpful there.
yep, terrific. And deliveries from the town, from the school, and vice versa will be documented. Mr. Murphy?
On this system here, did you say there will be cameras also outside the area?
There will be an external camera, but there will be cameras in both stairwells.
But as far as the outside parking lots or anything?
There
like-
will be a camera on the exterior, yes.
Okay. Will this system allow, for example, for the police to tap in at any time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on, Article 38F.1, Cedar Hill Rough Mower. Actually, I was deferring to the town manager first. Sure, okay, so there's a motion for that. Is there a second? To hear 38, F1 and F2 together. Mr. Mitchell has seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Terrific. Thanks, Peter. So, Mr. Hartman?
Not trying to be facetious, this is literally a mower that mows the rough, which apparently is the area alongside the fairway, which is kept at a different height and a rougher cut in order to present a challenge to golfers. It has been mowed in the past by a tow-behind mower on a tractor, which is well past its prime. So they have requested an actual mower that can be used in the rough that they expect probably has a lifespan of 15 to 20 years.
And because we're hearing these together, do you want to talk about the backhoe and bucket?
Yeah, they currently have a tractor, but not a backhoe and a bucket. They frequently need to use that, and what they have to rely on is either need that kind of equipment, and what they have to rely on is the good graces of John Batchelder and the DPW, who frankly try to respond, but you know, their work comes first, and if they're working at the golf course, then their work's not being done. But I do have to say, whenever he can, John is very cooperative with both Victor at the golf course and with John Dennison in the recreation department.
Okay. And Ms. Walsh?
I have to say that Victor's been eyeing my tractor with a backhoe attachment because it works the field right across the street. The other reason why the Public Works backhoe isn't a good fit is because it's very large and can damage the greens when you use it. This is a smaller version of what they have at DPW because we don't move as much ground as they do. And it's really a necessary tool. We don't even know what the ground looks like underneath this snow. But one of the big problems we have is just cleaning up and then making sure the drainage system works. And you really do need a backhoe for that.
Yep.
Yeah, and I did neglect to mention, this is a smaller machine that is made for smaller jobs. If we were to have a major job, we would either have to contract it out or bring in DPW because this machine couldn't handle it. But it can handle most of what needs to be done at the golf course.
Is Mrs. Anzavino?
This is going to be paid for by Cedar Hill?
Yes.
Since it's an enterprise fund, it would be, yes, it would be part of the cost of operating Cedar Hill.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any opportunity to use this unit for snow removal? Just a thought?
It's possible.
Okay. It can be, it will be borrowed against Cedar Hill borrowing the enterprise accounts, and of course, right now, we know that it's subsidized from the general fund, but at some point it won't be. And it'll be self-sufficient, and it'll cover all its own business.
And it would also be available, frankly, for use by DPW, should they have a need for a smaller machine.
Yep, okay. Mr. Trunfio?
Instead of buying the machine, could we do a rental allowance, like $5,000 or $10,000 a year to rent equipment for this type of thing, or why do we have to have a machine?
You would have to put it in your budget, in the budget. If you're going to spend $5,000 or $10,000 a year,
Might as well buy it.
to me, it makes more sense to buy a machine that has a life, of 15 to 20 years, It just, you know, in terms of amortization of that amount, that certainly makes much more sense than rental, in my opinion.
All set, Ed? Bruce? Then
I,
Jim?
I just have a simple question, I think. Why is the Cedar Hill, if it's an enterprise account, within this general capital outlay article and not in its own article like the sewer department and water department are?
I would have to say that that's out of scope for this article.
Why?
Well, because it's a discussion about whether it should be an enterprise account. This is a discussion about a backhoe and a mower.
But this Cedar Hill Golf Course is an enterprise account.
That's correct.
So why are we hearing it under a regular town budget article?
Well, all of these articles are various sources of funding.
Well, this goes back to the previous point of the agenda being inaccurate because it says 5,020,599 when this article is 2,198,599. So things were combined where they shouldn't have been combined. This is just a point of clarification for me that why does sewer and water have to be their own articles? Why couldn't they be in this one if Cedar Hill can be in this one?
They could be. They could be.
So it's just, it was a conscious choice not to.
What we set out to do last year in the warrant, rather than have a separate capital article for each item they wanted to buy, which is one of the reasons why you were looking at warrants with 82 articles, we went with 3 articles for capital unless it was a unique project. So like last year, there was a capital item for $230,000 to do centralized dispatch. That could have been included in this article, but it wasn't. We could break out Cedar Hill separately. We decided to go with 3 articles, especially given the amount of money that is requested in capital virtually every year in water and sewer. It made sense to break those 2 out and just leave everything else in what was a general article.
I didn't know if it was some sort of legal thing or it was just
No.
a choice thing.
No, it was purely choice.
Okay, Mr. Guerin.
Just a comment here. I'm a little reluctant to vote for new equipment down at Cedar Hill in as much as the kind of maintenance that was performed on equipment down there the last few years. It was, because it was budgets that I worked on for 4 years, I was very concerned about the amount of maintenance that went on down there, or amount of maintenance that did not go on down there, I should say. I would like to have some way of having the town ensure that the maintenance required on this new equipment is going to be done.
I can assure you that since Ken Macy took over as superintendent, the maintenance has been done, and Victor has continued the maintenance. And on my watch, maintenance will be performed. You know, you don't invest money in equipment and then sit there and watch it rot.
I get your point, Jim, because even though the current administration and the current folks on watch down there are going to be diligent about it, how does that survive to the next generation of leaders and managers and overseers? So anyways, Mr. Murphy.
Just to tail off on that idea there, as far as maintenance-wise, do we have any type of maintenance program, software that generates, that'll kick out when preventive maintenance is due?
We do not currently. One of the things that we will probably be coming to town meeting on in the future, and I've actually had this conversation with the chairman of the finance committee, is as an organization, we need fleet maintenance software. And we need to have it installed and we need to follow it. We don't currently have that. That will be one of the next areas we tackle. We've been sort of working down a list based upon the items we think are most critical, but that is an item. It's on the list. It's, you know, maybe next year we'll come in for that. We desperately need it, and these pieces of equipment would be part of that. I will say that DPW currently has a list. It's probably not the most modern list. They do a good job with what they have. but it's not, the example I'll use is they can't call up. He has to go through a lot of work to tell you everything he has spent on a vehicle, but he can't tell you what it's spent on. So you can go out there and say, that truck, how much have you spent on it? And Fusty can tell you every dime he spent on that truck. But it's not possible with the system we have for him to tell you what he spent it on.
And just to kind of clarify that, when you go to that system, and I am in favor of it because I'm in facilities, that's my job. What happens is, we as a town plan on spending $250,000 a year on that expense between maintenance, the license fee, the computers and everything else, updating all the data, keeping all these records. You will need a full-time person and a helper just to do that. But it pays for itself in the long run. And when that article comes along, I will be in favor of it.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to go off track, but
I've warned Rick, we'll need a fleet manager. We'll need more than just the software. You're right. We'll need
Right.
somebody who can operate, because what we have now is we have 3 mechanics, and, you know, they'll work on a car and then go over to the computer and enter it in, but, you know, their first responsibility is keeping the fleet on the road, not keeping records.
He wasn't agreeing with me that he needed a fleet manager as a bribe or anything. I just want to be clear about that. And what prompted the discussion, Peter, was department heads bringing envelopes full of receipts and having no analysis to present about the need to replace a unit or vehicle or an apparatus or whatever it might be. And it led to a broader discussion about we need a better way to maintain the millions of dollars of assets that we have in equipment in the town.
And that gave me an opportunity to put in my pitch. He opened the door for it.
Moving on. Okay, all set? All right, great. We have now got Article 38. No, those are complete, all right? We're moving on to, actually, we're done, right? No, moving on to 9, but I think that we're all set with municipal operations at this point. Peter? So you guys can adjourn to your votes or whatever your next articles are, and the Finance Committee will take up Article 9, which are the budgets that are slated for review for tonight.
just for clarification, are we going to have something for next Wednesday night? Do you know anything about that?
What do you mean?
There's supposed to be a special town meeting, there's supposed to be articles.
Oh, yeah. Actually, the warrant, we'll have to, everybody will have to get a copy of all those articles, and I expect that we're going to be seeing that come out tomorrow.
Okay, will that be mailed out, emailed, or
Yeah, emailed and mailed.
how was you talking about? All right,
What's that?
thank you.
Is that
I'll
it?
make a motion to adjourn municipal operations. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Municipal Operations. Okay, Article 9, and we're at Public Safety, Building and Code Enforcement, page 28. Switching documents. Jim, was this your group, or whose subcommittee was this? Oh, Barb's, okay. Page 28. I hole punch right through the page numbers on this thing. Okay. Mr. Town Manager? Yeah, we're on page 28.
What page are we on?
28, and this is the Building and Code Enforcement Department, which is Department 0241.
So you're not going to do the budget tonight?
This is the budget. I'm going to request that Ms. Velazquez put the department numbers in red font for the benefit of the town moderator.
I guess one thing I have neglected to point out is when you look at schedules or total salaries on our side of Pearl Street. They are up, at least ways by our numbers, 3.06% total. And
For
when
the
you-
town,
For the town.
correct.
When you take police and fire out, the amount is 0.9%. And I just wanted to get that in the record.
And that is commendable. We appreciate you doing that. Okay. However, this department's going up 7.36%. Help us understand that.
Yeah, the big change is, he requested to change his wiring inspector from the current number of hours that they're working to an additional hours. If you recall, last year he asked to increase the plumbing and gas inspector, and that was approved. This year, he's indicating that activity has picked up enough that he needs additional hours from his wiring inspector.
Okay. Joe, did you have a question? Or did you have other things you wanted to highlight, Mr. Hartman? Was that the only item you wanted to highlight in this
I
department?
think that's it. Otherwise, it's a relatively flat budget.
Okay. And the code enforcement officer line from last year has now been, I guess, repurposed to the assistant building inspector / code enforcement officer.
Yeah, that is actually, that was a mistake on our part in the coding last year, for want of a better way of putting it. The actual title that the Board of Selectmen wanted on that position was Assistant Building Inspector / Code Enforcement Officer. So the board pointed that out, that we had not put in the proper title, so we put in the proper title.
Joe, did you have a question?
And I guess the assistant does in fact have all the licenses to do the job that Tom has. He's not an architect, but he does have all the necessary licenses under the statute to do virtually every function Tom does on behalf
Be
of
the
the town.
building commissioner.
Yes.
Yep. Mr. Malley?
The only thing I wanted to mention was something that was mentioned earlier, was that this department actually generates income, and that income is up, I think, was almost 200% in 2014 from 2011. So there is actually an increase in income coming into this department. I think in 2014 it was up somewhere around 640 or 650,000.
$645,629.
There you go. So obviously, even though we do have more people, and I mean, it's the same as last year, but we are spending more on this assistant building inspector, code enforcer. We're actually taking in more money too.
In 2011, John, to your point, the revenue was $326,000.
Yeah, so it's about double.
It's doubled.
That's all.
I did fail to mention that the additional hours for the electrical inspector, Jamie just reminded me, state law requires that solar installations be inspected by the electrical inspector, and we're seeing as a community more solar installations. And hence the additional hours.
Get a note of that. I got you, Barb. Mrs. Ansavino?
Two things. I just wanted to say that they are backed up because I had a friend who put in solar panels and it took at least 3 weeks before the inspector could get out there. And the second thing is our subcommittee said this was fine. We didn't find anything that we wanted.
Great. Okay. Joe?
Just out of curiosity, how many more hours will the electrical inspector be performing this job? Somehow I have it's gone from 12 to 19 hours.
I think they're going,
Time or?
no, they're going to actually .46. .46 would be approximately 19 hours.
Right, right now, they're...
No, it's approximately from 12 to just below 17 and a half.
Any reason for that, just out of curiosity?
It's a 35-hour week.
Okay.
and 17.5 is the cutoff for benefits.
It was 35-hour week for townhouse employees. Okay. All right, moving on to Human Services, Health, and this is the Board of Health, correct? Of course it is. This is not an
Correct.
enterprise account. Page 37. Did we change that to Board of Health? I thought so too.
We can, yes.
I saw your hand, Cynthia, give us just a second here.
That's all right, I just figured out
Okay.
my math skills are a little rusty.
Did you hear that change, Ms. Velazquez? Thank you. Page 37, Board of Health, Mr. Hartman. It's a 5.34% increase. Most of it looks like it's occurring in the other expense of this area.
Yes, they are, well, part of it is that the Board of Selectmen has proposed that hazardous waste day be paid out of the revolving fund. And those of you that were at that meeting will recall that. Her primary issue on the other expenses is that the Board of Health is doing a very active anti-tobacco program. So it's for materials for that program. It's, they're going to be doing checks to make sure that places that sell tobacco products aren't selling to minors. That sort of activity. They have promulgated some rules. Last year, they promulgated rules on dumpster inspections. So they are, in fact, widening their purview, if you will, which is good to see because statutorily they've had responsibility for these areas for quite some time. They just have not. With only one person on staff, they've just not been in a position to begin to do any kind of enforcement. Now, with a second person on staff in the field, they're able to begin to do more of these enforcement items.
Ms. Welch.
The reason I felt that the hazardous waste day should come out of that fund is it's actually called the Hazardous Waste Material Control Bylaw. It makes sense that if that, and we were assured that there were adequate funds to pay the assistant and do the 2 hazardous waste days and still have a surplus. So it just made sense to me.
Right. So this budget will be being reduced by $20,000, which will be picked up by the revolving fund. Ms. Colburn.
I was going to mention, I'm sorry, the 75,000 and right at the bottom coming out is for the assistant sanitarian as well as the hazardous waste.
Correct.
Does this department have one of the positions that was requesting a reclassification?
This department does have a position, if you recall, we talked about 2 individuals had exercised their right to appeal. One of them is in this department, and that is reflected in that person's salary.
Okay, so this salary is all set then?
Yes.
Doesn't need any adjustments?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to Veterans Services, page 38. Okay. Got a lot of notes here.
Yeah, see, I'm missing page 30. The big increase there is in benefits again, which are reimbursed on a 75% basis. Mike has indicated that he is seeing more and more widows, as unfortunately we're getting into my era, some Vietnam vet widows are beginning to emerge. A lot of the Korean veterans are dying off, and the spouses are coming in for assistance. And again, the amount of assistance that we grant is reimbursed 75% the next year.
That's on the benefits line only, right?
Yes. And I believe you will get, if you have not gotten already, he's going to come in for additional funds from the FinCom this year.
You think he's going to need funds?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, he gave us a run rate earlier, back in January, just as a heads up, or December, actually, but I haven't heard any updates since then.
Right. Mike does an excellent job, especially in terms of outreach.
Yes, he certainly does. Give me just a moment, please.
Can I ask a quick question while you're doing
Oh, yeah,
that?
sure. Sorry, Pat.
Is this a similar question? Is this department have a position that was also requesting a reclassification? And is that in the budget?
The reclassification study is in the process right now. If the reclassification is seen justified, could be between $917 to $2,513.
Do you have?
Best case, worst case.
Do you have any idea when you would know that? What I'm wondering is, would you have a problem if you had to encumber the salary if it turned out to be more and we didn't fully fund it? Am I making sense there? I mean, if you needed, say, an extra $1,000 and it wasn't decided before town meeting to adjust the salary line, could you would just absorb it within this department?
No, we could not.
You could not. So do you think you'd have any indication of when that would be done? I'm just wondering, would we get into problems again? How would we encumber the full salary?
I would like to have it completed within 4 weeks.
That's a good point, though. I mean, if worst case we ran into trouble, it could also be a FinCom
Transfer.
if we needed it to be.
What my expectation would have been.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Guerin?
I'd like to comment that the town should be proud for the amount of support they give to veterans' benefits. As compared to the rest of the communities in the state, we probably spend more per capita than anybody. But I think that at the worst, we're probably at some level in the top 10%, and those include the spending by a lot of the cities. Thank you.
Ms. Welch?
It's important to remember that what we see here is the state and the town. There are also millions of federal dollars coming in, and that's part of Mike's job. Some of these folks, we're tiding them over until they get their federal benefits. That can take up to 9 weeks, I know from experience. Granted, you do get a lump sum, but it's hard to live for 2 months on air, especially if you're not able to work at all. So this is just state and local, and as we mentioned, the state gives us 75%, but we're talking millions of federal dollars that these folks have earned. And this is the only state in the union that requires veterans agents to help hook these vets up to all of the benefits they've earned. And we know with the more recent vets, with the traumatic brain injury, if you didn't have an advocate like Mike, these folks would be homeless and destitute.
Yes, and particularly with all the challenges in the Veterans Administration. So our Veterans agent does do a terrific job, as does his support, Maria. The cost to the town, so everybody keeps saying it's a 75% reimbursement. It's not on the $750,332 being requested. It's just on the $650,000. So the cost to the town here is $262,632. That's what the Veterans agent and support services cost to the town is, just so everybody's clear. I don't want them thinking that we get 75% of the total bottom line. It's not the case. So if we didn't take care of these costs and budget for them and pay for them, the state will charge back 100% of the costs, I believe, against the cherry sheet right off the top. So not only would we not our share wouldn't be 25% at that point, it'd be the full bore. So, okay, any other questions? Seeing none, moving on. Council on Aging, page 39. Anything notable there? It looks like a decrease of 8.13%, and that's because of grant funding. Sorry, this is old. I have an old version.
It's 2.87% increase.
2.87% increase. Okay. All right. And what changed to make that happen, John, if you've got a...
Oh, I think it was just a math error on the percentage at the bottom.
Okay.
I think the numbers are still the same.
All right, so it's a plus 2.87%. Anything notable here, Mr. Hartman?
Not really. You know, there is in fact activity funded by the grants. She gets a formula grant from the state. The formula grant is based upon the number of elderly in a community. And as the community grows older, in theory, the formula grant should grow, but to a certain extent that depends upon the appropriation of the state legislature. And they are state dollars and they do come in. And the big change you've seen here is we have tried to include those grant dollars in the budget so that people can see the real costs of the service we provide. Traditionally, the amount of money spent on grants was not provided in the budget process. Another change here is that we do have a position that was upgraded to a program administrator position. Again, as with the others, reflecting what the person really does.
Okay. Just because this is the first place that really sticks out to me. The electricity charge here is up 37%, so that certainly contributes to this number going up.
Correct.
And one of the things we would consider as a committee is maybe taking that overage and putting it into the FinCom reserve fuel line. So it's there, but maybe not in the department. So if it's needed, we can get it there. And but it's a consideration at this point, not a movement yet. Okay.
For those of you that don't know, the large room at the senior center has been closed for several weeks now due to problems with the building and frost heaves. And there is an article for that in the special that's within the annual. I realize that's not on your agenda, but we hope to have it reopened very soon.
Right. Okay. Joe? Okay, Pat?
Get yelled at for not wearing it. I just want to verify, the clerical salary is now a program administrator 1, and it's split between Council on Aging and Youth Commission? Do I have that? That's all the same person?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you.
In this one, when we get to the next one.
Yeah, I didn't want to
Sure we'll be
violate the
discussing.
rules. Thank you.
Okay. Bob?
Do you see them ending anytime soon?
I have, one of the things she wants me to cover, and this is more under the Youth Commission than the Council on Aging, is that we are currently in year 7 or 8 of a 10-year grant. We are providing a certain level of service with the grant, obviously, and we've been providing it now for 7 or 8 years. And again, in terms of full disclosure, you will either see a request for additional town funds when the grant expires in order to keep the service level the same, or you will see a reduction in service. She does intend to apply for another 10-year grant, but there's no guarantee she'll get it.
What was the grant amount? Did you say that?
Oasis?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was like 600 and some odd $1,000. I
Yeah.
forget the lump sum of it, and it gets doled out over a period of time.
Okay, so maybe like 60, if we had to add it back in the budget, is that this entire 49,328? Is that entire amount the Oasis grant?
Well, that was, no, it's on the next page under youth, it's
It's, on,
91.
it's actually under the Youth Commission. That's why I said it to Bob's question. It's actually on the next page.
Okay.
But it does,
I just wanted to make sure I had the dollar amount correct if it expires and we had to pick up the cost. I just wanted to make sure I knew in my head what it was.
Right.
In 3 years, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the exception of the schools, her two programs are probably the most heavily grant-funded programs we have.
Right.
She's very adept at getting grants. But again, we just want folks to understand that you're providing services with these grants, the communities become used to the services, and there will be an expectation that those services will continue when the grants die out.
Right, which would make pure sense. But for the Council on Aging, that's not Oasis.
No,
That's a different grant.
That's a different grant.
Right.
And that's mostly,
Bob's question,
that's mostly the formula grant, and that's not going to go away.
but that's year to year though, isn't it?
It is based upon two factors. Number one, the federal appropriation to the state, and then the state's appropriation to the towns. And both the federal appropriation that comes to the state of Massachusetts is predicated on the number of elderly. And then in turn, when it's distributed statewide, it's also determined based upon the number of elderly. And the aging programs have been around, frankly, since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And the formula grant from the federal government has been around since that time, and that's 1965, 1966. So I don't think it's going anywhere soon.
Well, maybe they would give consideration to Indiana Jones's code. It's not the years, it's the miles, and I think we could add to the count on this committee. Moving on, unless there are any other questions, to the Youth Commission, page 40. So we understand that the grant there, the $91,000, is part of the 10-year Oasis grant. We're in year 7 of that grant. Okay? And outside of that, any questions?
You do have the other half-time position in here that was converted to program administrator.
Split with the, yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to cultural and recreation. Library, page 41. Mr. Desmond?
On this one, as far as the library is concerned, there was an increase in, the first one I had was the increase in the part-time wages. And as far as the activity in the library, has that increased from previous years?
Your circulation is up, right? Yeah, I'm going to defer to Pat on that. I know her circulation is up.
Okay.
I can't tell you how much.
Pat, do you still maintain your clicker counts at the doors, et cetera? Good. Could you get a copy of that to Bob's committee?
I did not.
Hmm?
Did I get a copy of his?
Your counts.
Oh,
Yeah. Just your usage. I think you.
yeah, I can get that to you, yeah.
Yep.
I
thanks.
actually was looking for, I do a a fact sheet status report every year to show, so I'll
Right.
send that to you.
Excellent.
But circulation is up, attendance is up, use of public access computers, somewhere between 10 and 20% from
Okay.
last year, yeah.
Have you considered putting parking meters in yet?
Say that again?
I said, have you considered putting parking meters in yet? I'm kidding.
No, no. You guys would have to make that decision. We would not do that.
And I won't. Okay, any questions about the library? I see Jim and then John.
Just, the only question I have is, what is that account that the money was squirreled away from that we could pay for the library upgrade?
On the construction, Jim?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we get that state grant, it's a state aid to public libraries grant we get every year. It's part of the cherry sheet that goes out that sends money to the schools, the library, and towns in general. And that's based on us meeting those requirements I was talking about before. It used to be, when I first came, we got $40,000 a year from the state aid grant. Lately, we get about $12,000 to $18,000. So it's been dramatically cut based on the economy. But it's completely discretionary, and the trustees have advised that they would prefer, once the building project came along, that we not use it except for emergencies.
All right, thank you.
Pat, can you tell us how much you've accrued so far towards that?
I think it's between 70 and 80,000. And I just wanted to add the part-time budget, part-timers payroll budget had increased this year because we haven't increased part-timers, but the library union settled last year, and all the employees townwide, the goal has been to put them on the townwide matrix. And I've always had the part-timers, which are 19 hours or less, unbenefited positions, and there's 12 to 15 of those. They fall at the lowest grade of the statewide matrix, the townwide matrix.
Okay.
But that was an increase from what I had paid them in the past. They were below it. They were off the matrix, yeah.
All right, so they got a pay increase when
They
we
are-
implemented the new personnel policy that
That's right.
included the salary grids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was unplanned for.
John, then Ed.
I would note, Rick, that it's still
Um,
only slightly more than minimum wage.
I just had a question on the
Wait a
literacy
minute, what's
coordinator.
minimum wage now? It's 9, right?
Going to 10 January 1st.
No, it's 9 in Massachusetts,
I
isn't
think
it?
it's 850.
9, going to 10 January.
It's going, yeah, it's going, January 1st, it's going to 10 something. 1018, I believe. Does that sound
Of
right?
2015, of 2016?
Yes.
Okay, and that's been accounted for here?
And one,
Okay.
11 the year after.
So glad the government allows the free enterprise to determine these things. There's my commercial for big government. That's right. I'm sorry, John?
Yeah, so my question is literacy coordinator. So last year it went up about 11%. This year it's gone up 15%. I'm trying to figure out why it's going up so much
You want me to answer that?
each year.
Well, because of that.
I can-
Which one, John?
The literacy coordinator was 31,561, then went to 35,299, now it's 48,43.
On the grid.
That
But 11% last year and 15% this year.
last year, it currently is 2 part-time, 19 hours or less people filling the position. The union had requested that that become 1 full-time position, and so it's budgeted as if that might happen. It's 35 hours a week. Currently, they work about 25 hours a week.
Is the union aware of how many positions that we've added to part-time and to librarians, et cetera, over the period of time? Isn't it a bit much for them to keep asking for these kinds of things? There's another commercial. I can't negotiate contracts, but it would be a sentiment of mine.
So currently, we have 10 full-time union positions, 2 part-time union positions, and 13 part-time unbenefited positions. And that's pretty much been the status for the 17 years that I've been here.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so does that mean that you currently have 2 part-time employees doing that job?
Yes,
And the goal would be to make that a full-time position?
yes.
Okay. And what does that mean for the other individual?
No, they're both unbenefited. No, they're 19 hours or less, no benefits right now. The adult literacy people?
So what happened to the other part-time person? Did she go, or did you put her somewhere
Do a
else?
research project.
Well, if this happens, then we probably would just reduce her hours to like 5. It just depends what happens. She may not have a job. I'm not sure how that will work. But I'm not deciding it. They've requested it. It's in process.
Right, so, all right. It seems like you should be accounting for more people than if you're making one full-time plus you're keeping the other ones for some hours. That's all.
Pat? And then Ed.
This is my commercial. I very much appreciate the digital content that you have that I can download and get for my Kindle. I'm not so much a go in and get a paper book, so I appreciate the money savings. But I'm wondering, are you planning on increasing that at all? The wait times are outrageous.
Yeah.
You can be like 40-person in line because you've got one digital copy of a book, and I guess I can't comprehend how that works. Because one would think if you could have more than one, but I guess the licensing prohibits
But then you're
that.
all excited when it comes down. I get all excited.
You're not helping, Pat.
Are you increasing that at all?
I was waiting for 6 months for a book, and I got it today. I was very excited about it.
But by that point, I've bought the book.
So the good thing about being part of a network is that we share material. Our goal as library directors is to get our network to pay to get more e-content. It's very expensive, and the vendors the publishers who provide e-books on Kindles or Nooks or whatever you want to download it to, you would think if we bought one title, 10 people could borrow it at the same time, but the vendors won't allow us to do that because then they're not making any money. So they kind of manage it the same way they would manage a paper copy.
So does the money that we give you for books, is that for paper books, or is part of that for
It goes,
digital content?
we pay for both right now, but we're trying to get our network to buy more books in bulk for the entire network to share.
I'd be interested at some point if you have any statistics. I'm
Yeah.
just curious to see digitally, I would imagine that's rising.
It is rising pretty dramatically. The dilemma is the wealthier towns, like Hingham, for example, they have made a separate deal with Overdrive, which is the ebook provider, to buy something called Overdrive Advantage, which means every title they buy, we can't share. It's just for Hingham patrons.
Damn it.
We're not participating in that. We're trying to get the rest of us, some other towns are trying to get OCLN to just buy for the entire network. So that's it's business, it's the free market capitalism. So we do the best we can with it.
Thank you.
Can we just get a subscription to Netflix over there and just have public showings and put 20, 30 people that are on the wait list in there and let them see it? Just kidding. Ed?
Yeah, I'm just curious, the money the trustees have, that 70, 80 grand that's sitting there, where is that money physically? Is it the trustee control it? Is it in
No.
the general fund, or where is it?
Bill has it.
Yeah, it's in the general fund.
Okay.
Right, but it's
Yeah.
Right.
It's just
encumbered
earmarked.
for that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
encumbered.
by state
Town
law,
has
it's part of the general fund.
And just to clarify, if I'm reading this correctly off the revenue sheet, in fiscal 2013, there was $23,708 from that fund. There was for fiscal 2014, $24,090, but I think that's an estimate, and is budgeted $33,309 for 2016, but we generally take a 95% slice at that, not 100% on the forecast. Does that make sense, Pat?
It sounds close.
Okay.
Rick, just one more question.
Yeah, please, Bob.
And with the new accounting software, are you going to be tied into that as well?
Yes, we are. We're getting trained.
Beautiful.
Very excited.
What was the question?
The Munis.
Accounting software, as far as fees are concerned, would they be also utilizing the system as well?
Okay.
Every town department will be,
Okay.
without exception.
Think parking meters, you guys, after next year. Okay.
Ed's in a hurry.
Recreation, page 43. Why was, yep. This looks like it's decreasing by 4%.
Yeah.
Do I have the right copy?
Yes.
Yes, the big change here is that a longtime town employee who's currently clerical is retiring. And we have, with the recreation director has recommended, and we have agreed that we are creating a new position to replace this person called an assistant recreation director, who will be doing much more than clerical. They'll actually be providing recreational programming. And the starting salary for this position is actually less than the position of the person who is retiring. And that's the primary savings.
So the $64,000 question is, why is the department head paid significantly less than the assistant?
The department head, for those that don't know, is a retired teacher, is limited under retirement board rules on both a number of hours he can work in a week and the amount of money he can make. And I can tell you that it's my observation in the 2+ years I've been here that he's working many more hours than he's allowed to and not billing us for them.
Other questions? I do, but just give me a second.
While you're doing that, Rick, I just wanted to say that I just appreciate this department. Every year I have to give a kudos to Mr. Dennison, because he does so much with so little money. And it pains him to even come and ask for us for a cent more than he has to. And this is just one department that I just always appreciate the work they do.
Okay, actually, my question's on the next department, so. And I would echo what Pat's sentiments are. Mr. Dennison and his group do a terrific job. He just is so entrenched in this program and making sure the kids have places to go and be, because it's so critical in this day and age. So particularly in the summer. So anyways, when most towns now are struggling to figure out how to get the snow off their playing fields so that they can start their outdoor activities, sports programs and things of that nature. But he's terrific. He's a huge, another huge part of why Stoughton is so great. Okay. I am moving on to community events, page 44. Community events. Mr. Hartman.
Two things notable here. First off is that the Community Events Committee requested $15,000 in capital outlay, which we moved to the capital article, primarily for new banners to hang in the center. And when the Board of Selectmen reviewed this budget, they were worried that there was insufficient money to have an appropriate fireworks show, so they added to that line item.
Okay, so previously there had been a donation for fireworks, specifically from one of our generous benefactors in town, IKEA. And I think now that money is being split between fireworks and another area, is that correct?
Yes, they have new management, and they decided to split what their donating, and they're now donating to another entity besides the fireworks.
Right, so I think that the fireworks line is getting $10,000 now from IKEA, and 5,000 is going elsewhere. I think one of the suggestions too was to add fire and police to this budget. Does that ring a bell?
That is something the board discussed. They did not add. If that is the general sense and the finance committee would like to see that, then starting next year, we would be glad to add.
Will we be taking this out of the police budget and putting it into this
Yes, it
budget?
would be taken out of the police budget and put in this budget.
Okay, so that would be something.
The only thing I'd say about that, if I could, is that the $30,000 you see in the police budget does not include, it does not include just activities they do for this particular group. It also includes the various parades that are held by religious organizations that require details.
What would your recommendation be? This question came up at the joint Board of Selectmen Finance Committee hearings that were held previously. And
I believe that putting it in here is a good idea because it allows members of town meeting and the citizenry at large to know what they're actually spending on these community events. And not just those sponsored by the town's committee, but those that require services from the town that are not part of the town structure.
Okay. So could you get the amount of money that should be allocated to this department for us?
I believe it's $30,000.
The whole line from the police? I thought you said it was only a subset of that.
No, what I was saying is that the line from the police covers all of it, but some of it is not the activity of this group. See, there's actually a community events committee that sponsors these, but his $30,000 line item includes parades, et cetera, that are held by other organizations. But if you're going to center all that in an area called community events, then I would recommend you move the whole $30,000 over.
Oh, okay, so take it all?
Yes.
All right. So Bob, that's going to require having the town accountant add that line here and take it from the police department. And Barb? It's going to require you to take that money out of the police department and make sure that in our final budget recommendation, if that's what you guys recommend.
We would just have to make it clear to the community events committee that that's not their money.
Okay.
That it does, in fact, some of it goes to sponsor the activities of other organizations.
So how does money get authorized out of this and spent out of this department? Submit a request to you or the town accountant, or?
Typically, what used to happen is it used to go through Reggie in my office. We moved it last year under recreation, which is where you find it in most towns. And so now those things are being handled through John's office. And I will have to have a conversation about John because, Shastany will be submitting a bill for activities other than just this.
Okay. One second. And that also reminds me of the Board of Health. Bob, was that yours as well?
Yes.
Okay, so we got to make sure that we remember to take the $20,000 out of the Household Hazardous Waste Day line and move it down to the revolving fund line, so that so that money will be coming out of there. So essentially the 20,000 will go away.
Right, yeah.
So, okay. And, I'm sorry, hands. Bob, go ahead, then John, Pat, Roberta?
So first of all, since IKEA cut the funds by $5,000, are you suggesting to increase this budget by $5,000 for the fireworks?
The selectmen did in fact do that.
Okay, so that's going to increase by $5,000. And your suggestion or recommendation to put the whole $30,000 from the police, or would you recommend, I mean, they have 4 or 5 events a year. I mean, I'm not sure if that suits the whole budget in this budget as far as that's concerned. I don't, you know.
My reasoning is that if you want to know really what the general category, not the committee, but the general category of community events costs the taxpayer,
Okay.
then that entire amount ought to be included in here.
Beautiful. Okay.
It's just that we need to make it clear to the committee, and I don't think it's going to be a problem for them, that this is not just for their events, it's for, youth baseball and their parade and other.
Mike's in there as well for his.
Yes, and the veterans are in there.
Okay.
John? All set? Pat?
Just to piggyback on what you were saying to Bob, the 20,000 already did come out of the Board of Health, so don't take that out again. That was already deducted as part of the 75,000 change to the bottom line.
It's deducted on the bottom, but you need to make sure when we do the book and show the projected expenditure that it says 75 and not 55.
Right, because right now it's 75. I just don't want you to hit it with another 20, and now you've got 95 coming out of your budget. So we can talk about that after. But I'm just not sure how I feel about the police and fire being in here. I understand what you're saying, but it almost goes against what we were talking about the other night, which was trying to keep the cost of policing in the police budget. So I kind of have mixed feelings on that. And as far as the police, they do have a lot of other events. What about events that are out of town? I know the police do things like that. Is that part of the community events budget? Or would that be entirely Stoughton community events?
Yeah, if they participate, for example, in a funeral procession for a police officer in another community or another estate, that's not a cost to the taxpayer at all. Right. Yeah, it's out of their overtime. Some of them go. Usually the the chief will send a token person, and almost always an officer.
So their community events line is for Stoughton. It's entirely
Yes.
Stoughton. Okay.
But it does include some of the processions held by some of the religious groups. It does include youth baseball, the annual parade for youth baseball, and again, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'm just saying that if it's all in one in place, it does identify for folks. Otherwise you're taking this amount and you're adding it to the amount in the police department, and then that's what it's costing us.
And I do understand that. I'm a little conflicted.
I can argue either way, frankly.
Thank you.
And there's also a separate line in DPW, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think John would tell you he doesn't spend all that much, and it's like Mark Dolph says that he always sends somebody who's actually he sends a crew who's on duty. The exception to that is the fire watch for the fireworks, and that is part of this budget. Once the fireworks come on site, there has to be a fire department personnel present until they're actually shot, until the fireworks are over.
And there is a 10% upcharge by the police department for every hour that somebody works one of these special details.
That is correct.
Does that come back to the general fund?
Yes, it does.
Okay. There are other donations.
In some towns, they set up a revolving fund. We don't have a revolving fund for police details. It's part of the general fund.
They're actually getting to a question I had on community events, but Dr. Camacho, did I see your hand up?
Yes. So we're taking from the police department, departmental community events, $30,000, and we're adding it to the community events. Is that correct?
I don't think you've made that decision yet. I think the chairman asked me what I thought about that, and
That's what's being contemplated here, yes.
All right. So I have to get this in my mind straight. The community events that are referenced under the police department, those are they the same, are identical with the community events that are on the community events page, or are these different events?
they are more events than are just on the community events page.
So not only would you need the 30,000, but you'd need to figure out more monies for these other events that are on the events page.
No, the 30,000 in the police department includes
Would include these.
includes these events, but it
Plus
also
others.
includes other events like the Holy Ghost procession and the youth baseball parade. His line item encompasses much more than just these events.
So it's this page plus other. One last question, though. If your funding source is out of community events rather than police department, does that have any implication for the insurance? for insurance of that would relate to ensuring the insurance of the officer, the safety of the officer, the fire, well, I don't know. I mean, it might depend on where you're paying them from, out of what budget, how the insurance interacts with that.
No, it would have no impact whatsoever. So, for example, you know, when the police are on a detail, it's a police function by state law. So, for example, if the detail's directing traffic, you know, a flagger cannot direct traffic from one lane into another lane. You can't cross the center line unless you've been ordered to by a police officer. So it's a police function, and it's covered under our insurance. Even if they're doing it for N-Star, it's covered under our insurance.
No, that's fine with me. I really was very happy when we brought this up again, because I think we should know what the police and fire costs are related to the events.
So you'd be in favor of leaving
I'm in
it?
favor of having
you're
it
saying.
added here, so we have the true cost. That's what we're looking for, isn't it? The true cost
Well,
of
I think in
things?
the case of the schools, the subcommittee is going to recommend that that money be put back in the police department, not allocated to the schools, so that we have all the police department costs in one area. But because we have special details, which are really not part of the policing of this town, there's special events that the DPW has them for crews that they have out that are state funded and things of that nature, and so does, and so is there a line in for other events in the community. So there's part of the thought. So yes, I agree with you about trying to get it all in one place. I'm not so sure that I'm too worried about these specialized events that are not really town policing. Okay? In the community events, I think we had a discussion with Melissa Lynch, who's the vice chair of the committee, who was here to speak on this budget. There are other donations that come into this committee. So is what she told us. And now with the money that comes in from, say, for example, IKEA, should there be a revolving account here?
I'd have to check. It depends. I mean, you can have, if it comes in the form of a gift, then Bill can set up a gift account. You know, my worry would be, quite frankly, that they're not a 501c3 corporation, and therefore anybody who donated to one of the events shouldn't be taking it off their taxes because it's not tax deductible.
Well, that'd be their issue.
Right.
Right. But in this particular case, I think there's some kind of a rider, for example, for, let's say, the fireworks, that the town is putting up at least as much as the patron is putting up. Is that correct?
I think the way that particular donation has been handled is that we budget 100% and it just goes in as miscellaneous revenue because that particular vendor did not want their name identified with the fireworks.
Okay. I just thought that there was a stipulation the town had to be in for a percentage of the total cost of, say, the fireworks.
No, and when I was in Wareham, for example, we had fireworks and it was 100%
You have an IKEA in
volunteer. No, it was done, when they put people on street corners with buckets and onset and grabbed money from people in cars, but that paid for the fireworks.
So your answer is you don't think there should be a revolving account?
I think I'm more than willing to share it, to explore it with Bill. There are certain things that a revolving fund can be used for, and typically the way it is that I think the statute says that it has to be a fee. A fee is not a donation, which is why I think you might be talking more a gift account than a revolving fund.
Where would the parking meter money from the library go? Just kidding.
One more question.
Pat?
I swore that the fire department had a community events, but it was kind of, I don't want to say hidden, but it was wrapped up in the other salary
He might have.
expenses
I
last
asked him
year.
to include it, but and I asked John Batchelder, but it seems to me that when we met with both of them, they indicated, no, we're sending people on duty. Actually, in the past, there was a member of the DPW staff who was very active in the Community Events Committee, and apparently a lot of the stuff that they got from DPW was never, nobody was there, was being paid. This person was acting as a volunteer. He just happened to be a DPW employee.
Can I see your penny saver?
But do you know about fire? Well, I guess we could follow up. I just would have bet anything that fire had one, but it wasn't as clearly visible.
I will be more than glad. I know that for parades and et cetera, he has who's ever on duty, and they will in fact respond to a fire. They may leave the parade. And in fact, I guess in some events in the past, they have left. Yeah. On the other hand, again, the only thing he really identified to me was the actual fire watch for the fireworks. And the Community Events Committee is paying for that as part of that line item.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Joe, you look like you want to ask a question. Okay, but actually, we've got articles for them to consider tomorrow night, so.
I had a whole
Okay.
breakout.
Where's my agenda I just had here? I flipped the page. All right. That's community and cultural and recreation. We're moving on to the enterprise accounts for Cedar Hill, page 46. Up, sorry. Parks, page 45.
I have a question.
Park, Mr. Town Manager.
The big increase in parks is a $10,000 line item for tree plantings.
Where are they going?
The thought was that they would go primarily on corridors leading into the town.
Is that Parks though, or is that DPW?
This would be.
The 10,000 she wanted last year.
This is DPW, incidentally. This is just a division of DPW.
No, this is the 10,000 she wanted last year that we didn't give her.
That is correct.
That's why I assumed it was the same 10,000. That was my question. Is this that same 10,000 that she couldn't tell us how much it was really costing and how much we were spending per tree? And
All right,
do we have any of that
just to
information?
shortcut this conversation, this is to buy trees, period, right?
Correct.
This is not for architect, landscape
No.
design, or
No,
for
this will
labor,
be-
or for
this will be
anything.
to buy
Last year, she
trees.
said that at the beginning, and then it changed.
What's
The conversation
envisioned
went on.
is.
Now we have it on record,
Okay.
in the minutes.
This is just for
Well,
trees.
At
you
a
know,
public hearing.
we may
See?
use the services of a landscape architect, but it would not come from this line item.
It wouldn't what?
It would not come from this line item.
Oh,
This
okay,
line
okay.
item was for
Yeah, no, 'cause
plantings
last time she
only.
thought maybe it'd be 6,000 or 7,000, I think, for the architect itself. So then it was like, wait a second, what's going on? So, all right.
I doubt it would be that much, John, but this
Well, I think that's what she said.
$10,000.
Yeah, she was guessing.
The understanding I have from the Board of Selectmen is that this $10,000 is for plantings, period. And part of it is to get some more mature trees, which are a little more expensive rather than saplings.
I just want to be clear on what it was. That's all.
Yeah, well, 10 grand doesn't buy you much.
No, especially if you're buying mature.
That's right. Bob? Mr.
Yeah.
Desmond?
Just the increase from machinery there and truck rental from 11.6 to 35.
That is, and he's going to do actually,
This is to remove trees, Bob.
yeah, this is to remove trees. And I guess more importantly, it is level funded. It is currently funded in the current budget at 35, is proposed next year for 35. Last year was the big increase, and we do have, John has identified several trees that need to come out, and that's what that's for, is to rent the equipment to get the trees out.
So if you extend out this run rate, the trees are in trouble.
Yeah, we will not be cutting the trees we're buying.
In the 2014, that's just what you spent. You might have budgeted 20,000 for all we know. That's just what you spent, was 11.6.
Correct, that's just what we spent. In fact, we may well have budgeted 35, I'd have to check.
And I've requested an updated expense forecast budget tracker that shows 9 months of actual and the last 3 months of budgeted or forecasted numbers, and I'm expecting that we'll be seeing that shortly.
Yeah, we have requested it from department heads. The request went out late last week when we talked about it.
Yeah, it'd be good for us to have for our vote, so we can update an actual number like that, okay? Can we move on from culture and recreation? We all set there? Not that I was trying to shortcut anything. We are now moving on to the enterprise accounts, Cedar Hill, page 46.
We did.
Did we?
Well, you didn't really do the budget, you did the article
We
where
did the
you,
articles, right.
where you,
No, we did.
oh, did we? Okay.
No,
Right.
We did. We did.
I've got notes from the selectmen meeting, but
Well, on the enterprise, we did twice. We had them listed as an enterprise, and then we had them listed as a budget.
well, it's listed in the public hearing, so we need to be able to hear it tonight. If there are anybody from the public that would like to speak on it, or anybody from the subcommittee that has this item, even though we've discussed it once or twice already. Okay, I've acknowledged that. We're moving on. Anybody from the public or anybody from this committee that has questions on this? You're out of order? So are you. Maybe. Any update on the concessionaire there, by the way?
I'd like to hear no.
Not yet, we're exploring some options right now.
And what's the status of the liquor license there?
The liquor license is currently in possession of the Board of Selectmen.
You do have it, okay. All right. We are meeting tomorrow.
Ed had a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ed.
I want my same answer. Do you know what the revenue is so far for 15 on the golf course?
The revenue on 15 in a golf course, I actually gave to Rick last week,
Oh, you know what?
when
I
you
gave-
asked for it.
I gave it to Bruce because I thought he asked for it, but it was you, Ed.
Bruce did ask for it.
Oh, see? Ed, I have it, and I'll pass it to you.
I thought it
Okay,
was you that asked
and
for
given the tough...
it. You and
win-
Eddie don't look anything alike.
Well, the good news is that Bruce has reviewed this.
And in your opinion, March and April look kind of tough for the golf course with the snow and all that and bad water and
And
yada,
actually,
yada,
late October or November was pretty bad too because of the rain.
Do you have any feel for the percentage of revenue that you may lose or anything to that nature? or-
I can tell you that greens fees were up last year. What hasn't been determined yet, as Ms. Walsh said, they don't do memberships until April, and the memberships are a source of income. So we don't know until the memberships are done.
What you're gonna get?
I'll get it for you after the meeting, Ed. I have an incredible filing system of binder clips. Okay.
I know. So you were wrong.
Steve, could you pass that over to Ed?
Now you found it.
I even have Bruce's name written on it, but that's okay. You can cross that out and put Ed. We just want to be on record as to following up on our members' requests. All right, so we have a meeting tomorrow night. We'll be discussing the rest of the fire articles. We have the budget for public safety, and we'll be discussing the fire and rescue budget, then the regional schools, and then the Stoughton Public School budget. You were handed tonight the final budget for the Southeast Regional School System. which is different than what's in your book, and we'll need to have the school subcommittee update that number. But this is the final number. Matter of fact, they sent us the copy printouts, which I gave to Jamie last night so that she could distribute to this committee. And if, and I must have subcommittee chair's recommendations by tomorrow, or we will have to proceed without you. So, our intention is to get a draft of the budget, working draft of the budget on Friday. Ed?
Yeah, just wondering, with Southeast Regional, it was in the paper that Deval cut the transportation budget to those schools and they might fight it, the districts. Do you know anything about that, Mr. Town Manager?
We know it's out there, but we've not heard anything yet.
Do you have any idea how much it might be if they do decide to cut it and it sticks?
It would depend upon how much they do cut it, and it would depend upon whether or not Governor Baker changes former Governor Patrick's plan.
All right.
Well, the governor has said that he is very committed to making sure he protects the state aid. And right now, the legislature is considering his proposal for retirement, early retirement on 3,000 to 4,000 state employees to be able to make up some of these.
It passed the House.
It did pass the House.
It did
today,
pass
is
the
what I
House
heard.
today.
Right. That's what? What's your point? This is next year. Well, we'll see. We can only do what we're doing. Barbara, anything?
I just want to say that I gave everybody a pamphlet on the fire engine.
Barbara is selling fire engines part-time in her retirement, so. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Bruce, second. All in favor? Aye. Jim and Bruce are fighting over second. All opposed? Thank you very much, everybody.